So, since the election here in Australia wrapped up, one question has kept coming up as we've analysed how profoundly disastrous this election was for the Conservative coalition. And that question is the coalition genuinely cooked? Are they beyond the point of saving themselves? And I think the answer to that question is that at least for the foreseeable future, that just might be the case. Now, a quick reminder on the context of what exactly happened in last week's election. I've done a deep dive on the two-party preferred vote and how disastrous that is everywhere, but a really interesting trend has started occurring in the primary vote. Here in Australia, that means looking at all the votes based on who individual voters put as their first preference, referring to parties or independent politicians. So looking at first preference votes in Australia in this election, first, of course, is the Australian Labor Party. They're on 34.7% of first preference votes. The coalition, by comparison, is on 32.2%. And that is disastrous and horrific. But what it also implies is that all other minor parties and independent candidates got 33.1% of the vote, beating the coalition. For a point of reference, the last time the coalition performed that terribly in the primary vote, or rather performed worse than that, was back in 1943 during World War II, when the Labour government was incredibly popular because it was wartime. One of the biggest existential threats to the country, the threat of a Japanese invasion, was hanging over the election, and people flocked to Labour. That was the last time the coalition performed anywhere near as badly as it did in this election. It wasn't even called the Liberal Party back then. The mainstream Conservative Party back in 1943 was the United Australia Party. And to give you a sense of the scale of that loss, the UAP, as it was nicknamed, literally collapsed after the 1943 election because its results were that bad. And from the ashes, that's where we get the modern Liberal Party. Now, I am not claiming that the Liberal Party is going to collapse in on itself now, but I do think that the future of the coalition is on very shaky ground at the moment. In my last video, I touched on how horrible the situation was for unity within the coalition at the moment. Well, it seems that in just a few days, the situation has got so much more worse than even I would have expected. So the Liberal leadership race to replace Peter Dutton has boiled down to two candidates. It is now going to be between Susan Lee and Angus Taylor, two people with the collective charisma of a wet tuna sandwich. Now, Susan Lee is the more moderate of the two options, but I need to stress how low of a bar that is when we look at the campaign that Angus Taylor is currently putting together. It has now been confirmed that Jacinta Price, the incredibly right-wing former national senator who just defected to the Liberals, will be Angus Taylor's running mate. She will be contesting the deputy leadership of the Liberal Party. Now, Angus Taylor is a well-established member of the hard right in the Liberal Party. He was Peter Dutton's treasurer and was responsible for economic policy during this election. And despite the fact that even members of his own party are telling him that he should have no part in leadership because of how terrible he was on the economic front, those complaints are seemingly falling on deaf ears. After losing 2 elections in a row because they lost the centre, Angus Taylor is now pitching a style of party leadership that is going to move the Liberal Party even further to the right, with a deputy leader who infamously wears MAGA hats and used the term "Make Australia Great Again." So that is one half of the coalition. We have the Liberal Party flirting with the idea of maybe abandoning the centre even more, but that is not the only news this week. Since I uploaded my last video, it looks like this type of inter-party chaos is also going to take over the National Party. So the National Party actually had a much better election cycle than the Liberals did. They pretty much held on to all of their seats and didn't suffer anywhere near the swings against them that the Liberal Party did in outer suburban and inner city electorates. But after every election, the National Party basically has a leadership ballot, basically just a stamp of approval if the current leader is supported going ahead. And that is the chance for anyone in the National Party to raise their hand and challenge the current leader. Now, in my previous video about the state of the coalition, I mentioned that there was one senator from the National Party, Matt Canavan, who was arguing that with how things were going, maybe the National Party, considering it was more successful, should start contesting seats previously held by Liberals in outer suburban areas to try and expand its base at the cost of the Liberal Party in the future. And this, of course, would fundamentally break the coalition agreement and cause chaos within all conservative politics in Australia. Now, Canavan is a bit of a media personality, goes on air a lot, and has this reputation as being one of, if not the most right-wing member of the coalition entirely. Mainly for his perspective that, well, he doesn't think climate change is real, and he wants to roll back any attempt by the government to achieve net zero by 2050. Now, Canavan's whole routine, his perspective on things, is that under any circumstance under which things don't go well for the coalition, his line is, we weren't conservative enough. We need to get more into those right-wing policies. So that's his perspective. And what's fascinating is that he has announced that he is going to challenge David Littleproud, the current Nationals leader, at the next party room meeting to take over leadership of the National Party. So we could be looking at a situation in just the next week or so where the Liberal Party is led by a member of its hard right faction after it just lost the second election in a row for abandoning the centre. The deputy leader could be a former National who is a MAGA want-to-be politician. And on the other side of the coalition, we could have the most far-right member of the coalition taking over the Nationals, someone who is openly hostile and is very open to the idea of breaking the coalition agreement as it currently exists. Now, I am not going to say that the Liberal Party is dead in the water at this point, nor the coalition as a whole. In the aftermath of a defeat this horrific for the coalition, there are going to be a lot of voices acting very irrationally. So this could all blow over. But if I was writing up a scenario in which the Liberal Party and the coalition itself collapsed and had to be rebuilt from scratch, what is currently happening is probably the situation that I would write up. Now, no political party in a fair and open democracy is going to be condemned to be in opposition forever. At a certain point, situations will change, the political reality will shift, and conservatism in Australia will make a comeback at some point down the line. But there have been instances in Australia where one party has held on to power for a decade, or even one instance of 2 decades. And I think the Liberal Party is almost setting itself up to let Labor take the reins for at least another 10 years. And unfortunately, the Liberal Party is going to have to learn the lesson the hard way. They historically lost in 2022 because they abandoned the centre. The exact same thing happened in this election in 2025. After getting kicked in the teeth twice for not appealing to moderate voters, they are now even more frenzied and fanatical than ever. And I can't believe I'm saying this, it's going to take another massive defeat for them to begin to read the writing on the wall of seeing where they went wrong. Anthony Albanese, after this election, said that he wants the Labor Party to become the established party of government. Because throughout Australia's history, it is normally the Conservative option that is taking the reins and is actually in government. Labor is normally the exception and not the rule, only getting into power occasionally and not for very long. Albo wants to switch that around, and going forward wants Australia to be a country that goes to the Labor Party more often than not. And it seems that if the Liberal Party and the broader coalition continue down the path that they are currently on, well, Albanese's dream might just come true.